The rule was older than anyone could remember, and no one had ever broken it. Zith had read the galactic archives on the subject 11 times during his career, not because the rule was complicated, but because he found the simplicity of it professionally reassuring. A single directive, translated into every known language, preserved across every civilization that had achieved spaceflight. Do not wake the humans. No elaboration. No subclauses. No footnotes explaining what the humans had done to earn such a universal and unanimous warning. Just the directive, standing alone in the archives the way a very large and very old tree stands alone, not because nothing else grew near it, but because everything else had learned to give it room. Zith considered himself a careful scientist. He had built his career on the premise that the most dangerous thing a researcher could do was assume they already knew what they were looking at. He checked his instruments twice. He ran his protocols in full. He had never, in 23 years of fieldwork, caused an incident. He was thinking about this, about his record, about his protocols, about the deeply satisfying absence of incidents in his professional history, when Zix activated the probe. The sound the human ship made was not an alarm. It was not a warning. It was something that Zith's instruments registered simply as activation, a shift from dormancy to function, clean and total and immediate, like a light being switched on in a room that had been dark for centuries. Systems that should have been dead or degraded came online in a sequence so precise and so fast that Zith's monitoring display could barely track it. Power redistribution, life support recalibration, atmospheric adjustment, navigation wake-up, and then rising beneath all of it like a tide coming in from a very long way away, the cryogenic pods, thousands of them, tens of thousands. One by one and then all at once, beginning the sequence that the galaxy's most sacred rule had existed specifically to prevent. Zith turned to look at Zix. Zix's crystalline form had gone nearly transparent. This was what happened to young Zellians under extreme stress. The bioluminescence drained from their structure, leaving them pale and see-through in a way that communicated, across all possible cultural barriers, I have done something. Zith said. The quantum signature, Zix said. I didn't. The probe was passive. It was just a scan. The resonance with their cryogenic field was completely. Zix. Theoretically unprecedented, Zix finished very quietly. Zith turned back to his display. The activation sequence was still running. There was nothing on the display that suggested it could be stopped, reversed, or paused. The human ship systems were executing with a kind of flawless precision that Zith associated with technology that had been designed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had built in absolutely no margin for being interrupted. He sent the emergency transmission to High Command with hands that were admirably steady, he thought, given the circumstances. Code Ultraviolet. Human awakening in progress. Sector 7. He included the coordinates, the vessel identification, the activation timeline, and a brief factual summary of what Zix had done, because Zith believed in accurate reporting even when, especially when, the accurate report reflected badly on his vessel. The response was immediate. Within 4 minutes, a containment fleet had surrounded the human ship. Within 5, the High Commander herself was on his screen, her ancient form a deep and stormy purple, her expression conveying a specific quality of fury that Zith recognized as the fury of a person who had hoped, against all evidence, that this particular emergency would never actually arrive. You absolute neutron stars for brains, she said. It was, Zith would later note in his official report, a historically accurate assessment of the situation. The human ship's communication systems came online 40 minutes after the activation sequence began. Zith had spent those 40 minutes in a state of controlled scientific observation, monitoring the ship systems, logging every data point, and maintaining the professional composure that he felt the situation required. Zix had spent those 40 minutes sitting very still in the corner of the research vessel's bridge with the expression of someone privately rehearsing apologies. The first transmission was short. Who dares disturb our slumber? It was broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously, in a language that the universal translator identified as Ancient Standard Human, a dialect not heard in active use for centuries, and delivered with the measured, unhurried tone of a species that had woken up in an unexpected situation and had decided, consciously and deliberately, to be extremely calm about it, which was, as Zith would come to understand, significantly more unsettling than if they had been angry. The High Commander, still on the comm, went very quiet. Open a response channel, she said finally. To say what? Zith asked. The High Commander's crystalline form flickered. It was, he realized, the first time in his career that he had seen her uncertain. I have no idea, she admitted. Get me the ambassador. Ambassador Crystal arrived aboard the human vessel 3 hours later, leading a diplomatic delegation of 8, all of them polished to a standard of crystalline perfection that represented the absolute peak of Zellian formal presentation. Crystal had prepared for this. She had prepared for everything. That was the premise of her career, the foundation of her reputation, the quiet and unassailable confidence that she brought to every impossible situation. She had smoothed over wars. She had talked a hive mind out of converting a solar system into administrative paperwork. She had once resolved a territorial dispute between 2 species who communicated exclusively through seismic vibration, using nothing but careful timing and a very good sense of rhythm. She had not prepared for the airlock opening to reveal humans in sleeping attire, holding cups of a substance that her sensors immediately flagged as a potential chemical stimulant of unusual potency. There were 5 of them. They looked, Crystal thought, like people who had just been woken up, not frightened, not aggressive, not particularly interested in the fleet of Zellian warships currently maintaining a containment formation around their vessel. Mostly they looked tired, and mildly, specifically displeased in the way of people who have a list of grievances and have decided to work through it methodically. The one at the front was wearing a bathrobe. Their hair was doing several things simultaneously, all of them structurally improbable. They were on their 3rd cup of the chemical stimulant. They looked at Crystal's delegation with the careful, unhurried attention of someone who has all the time in the world and is choosing, as a matter of personal philosophy, not to rush. You're the ones, the human said, who thought it would be a good idea to wake up several million people before their alarm went off. Crystal's prepared speech had 17 paragraphs. It covered historical context, diplomatic protocol, formal apologies in 6 registers ranging from ceremonial to deeply personal, a comprehensive outline of reparations, and 3 separate rhetorical strategies for de-escalation. She had rehearsed it 4 times on the journey over. She opened her mouth to deliver the opening paragraph. Save it, Sparkles, the human said. Crystal closed her mouth. Zith, watching the feed from the research vessel, noted in his log that this was the first time in recorded history that an ambassador of the Zellian diplomatic corps had been addressed as Sparkles. He noted it factually, without commentary, because he was a scientist and scientists did not editorialize. He also noted, purely as a physiological observation, that his crystalline form was vibrating in a pattern that his instruments identified as suppressed amusement. He was going to need to recalibrate those instruments. The debriefing that followed was later classified in the diplomatic archives under the heading Unprecedented. See also, Help. The human, whose name was Voss, as they eventually mentioned, in the offhand way of someone who considers names to be a minor administrative detail, spent the first 40 minutes explaining to Crystal's delegation exactly how difficult it was to synchronize the sleep schedules of several million people. This was apparently a logistical achievement of considerable complexity. Crystal had not known this. Crystal had not known any of this. Crystal had prepared extensively for first contact with a species that might be hostile, or frightened, or confused, or technologically primitive. She had not prepared for a species that was primarily annoyed about scheduling. Do you know, Voss said, settling into what appeared to be a custom-constructed seating arrangement that had been assembled from materials sourced from 3 different sections of the ship, all of them extremely comfortable. How long it takes to get several million people to agree on a nap time? Crystal began. It takes a very long time, Voss said, and now we're awake early, so. The so sat in the air between them with the comfortable weight of an unfinished sentence that both parties understood completely. Crystal's second diplomatic assistant, a junior crystalline being of considerable promise, had begun vibrating at a frequency that suggested structural distress. Crystal made a small gesture that meant hold together, please, we are representatives of a great civilization. The assistant attempted to comply. We have prepared extensive reparations, Crystal said, returning to her notes with the particular determination of a person who has invested significant effort in those notes and intends to use them regardless of circumstances, including the latest in comfort technology, dream enhancement devices, atmospheric regulation systems compatible with human. That's very sweet, Voss said, in the tone of a person who does not find it sweet so much as beside the point. But what about pizza? The universal translator processed this word. It cross-referenced 17 databases. It returned a result that Crystal read twice before looking up. Pizza, Voss said, is extinct, we checked. While we were asleep, apparently no one maintained the necessary agricultural base for the specific combination of ingredients that constitutes. They paused. Something moved across their face. Crystal had extensive training in reading non-human emotional expression, and even she was not entirely sure what that expression was, except that it was sincere. You let pizza go extinct, Voss said. I want that noted. It is noted, Crystal said faintly. Zith, watching from the research vessel, added pizza extinction, source of significant human grievance, to his log. He was beginning to feel that his log was going to be much longer than he had anticipated. The town hall was Voss's idea. Crystal had no framework for a town hall. The concept, a large gathering of affected parties to collectively voice concerns, propose solutions, and achieve consensus through structured but informal discussion, existed in the Zellian governance model in a theoretical form, described in the administrative archives under the heading Decentralized Resolution Mechanisms, and noted as historically impractical at scale. Humans, apparently, had a different perspective on the practicality. Several million of them were now awake. They all had opinions. The town hall was scheduled for the following morning. Crystal returned to the diplomatic vessel that evening and sat in her quarters for a long time without moving. Her form had dimmed to a soft, pale blue, not the deep blue of distress exactly, but the particular color of a person whose model of the world is undergoing significant revision and has not yet arrived at a replacement. Zith knocked on her door because he felt, obscurely, that someone should. How bad? He asked when she let him in. They want committees, Crystal said. They're already forming committees. There is a committee about the pizza. She paused. There is a subcommittee about the pizza. Zith sat down across from her. What does the subcommittee address that the main committee does not? I don't know, Crystal said. I was afraid to ask. They sat together for a moment in the particular silence of two people who have been professionally competent their entire lives and are currently watching their competence decline to apply to the situation at hand. It was, Zith thought, a surprisingly companionable silence. I keep thinking, Crystal said, about the rule, don't wake the humans. I've known it my whole life. Everyone knows it. I never once asked why. Neither did I, Zith said. What does that say about us? Zith considered. That we were well-trained, he said, and perhaps not quite curious enough. Crystal's form flickered with something that might have been a laugh. Speak for yourself. You sent a junior researcher with a probe to scan the most carefully protected ships in the galaxy. I did not send Zix to activate the probe. You brought Zix. Zith acknowledged this. It was, as Crystal had recognized, the more relevant point. The revelation happened on the third day. It happened not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a briefing room on the human ship. A comfortable space that had been set up, Zith noticed, with seating calibrated to accommodate Zellian physiology, which meant the humans had known they were coming, which meant the humans had been paying attention, which meant that the comfortable assumptions the galaxy had built around human dormancy were already showing cracks before a single word was spoken. Voss was there. 3 of the human scientists were there. Crystal was there with 2 surviving members of her diplomatic team. The others had been sent back to the flagship following various incidents of crystalline structural distress. Zith was there because he had, by this point, decided that whatever was going to be revealed was something he needed to hear directly, as a scientist in person, without the buffer of a calm feed and the option to revise his log afterward. Zix was there because Zith had not been able to think of a compelling reason to leave them behind. One of the human scientists, a small person with extremely alert eyes and the manner of someone who has been waiting a long time to tell a particular joke, pulled up a holographic display of the colony ship systems. Internal architecture, power distribution, the cryogenic network. These are your scans of our ship, the scientist said. Crystal nodded, conducted at respectful distance as per protocol. Right, the scientist pulled up a second display, overlaid on the first. And these are the actual systems. The 2 displays were not the same. The difference was not subtle. What the Zellian scans had shown was a collection of old technology, functional but basic. the kind of systems a species would build before they had figured out the more elegant solutions. What the actual display showed was something else entirely, layered, recursive, operating on principles that Zith's scientific training identified immediately as several generations beyond anything the Zelian had developed. The cryogenic pods alone were not cryogenic pods. They were quantum consciousness storage devices. The ship's power systems were not nuclear. They were something that the universal translator rendered simply as better. The navigation array was not navigating. It was thinking. The room was very quiet. "The warning," Crystal said finally. Her voice was entirely steady. Zith admired that. "Don't wake the humans. We assumed it was a precaution, a protection, something to keep us from disturbing you." "Sure," Voss said pleasantly. "That's one way to read it." "What is another way to read it?" Voss looked at the scientist with the alert eyes. The scientist looked back with the expression of a person who has been waiting for this exact moment for a very long time and intends to enjoy it fully. "We wrote it," Voss said. The silence that followed had texture. Zith could feel it against his crystalline form, dense and reverberating, the silence of a large and load-bearing assumption being quietly removed from the structure of his worldview. He checked his instruments. They confirmed that he was experiencing a significant cognitive recalibration event. He noted this in his log. "You wrote the warning," Crystal said. "We scattered it across the galaxy," Voss said. "Translated it into every language, made sure it got into every archive. It took about 40 years, best prank in recorded history objectively." Voss paused. "Subjectively too, in my opinion." "Why?" Zith heard himself ask. The word came out before he had consciously decided to ask it, which was, he supposed, the most honest kind of question. Voss looked at him. It was the first time Zith realized that Voss had looked at him directly and at length. There was something in the human's expression that was not amusement, or not only amusement, something quieter and more considered. "Have you ever," Voss said, "been the most capable person in every room you walk into?" Zith thought about this. "No." "It's exhausting," Voss said. "Everyone wants something. Everyone needs something solved. Every civilization hitting its first major crisis sends a message, and you answer it, and then there's another one, and at some point you look at your team and you say, and I am paraphrasing here, but only slightly, we have solved everything. We have clean energy, world peace, faster than light travel, and a definitive answer on why children like a specific breakfast cereal. We have nothing left to invent. We need a break." Voss sipped their coffee. "So we took one." The scientist with the alert eyes was smiling with the full and unrestrained delight of someone watching a joke land exactly as intended, decades after it was set up. Zix, in the corner, had gone from transparent with shame to a pale and wondering gold, which Zith recognized as the color of someone experiencing a profound revision of their understanding of what they had done. "We weren't sleeping," Zix said softly. "Not exactly," Voss agreed. "We were running simulations, processing calculations, watching everything, and resting genuinely we needed the rest. But dormant, no, unaware, no." Voss looked at Zix with an expression that was not unkind. "You didn't wake us up, kid. You gave us a reason to come back out. There's a difference." Zix's form brightened slowly, like a lamp warming up. The reorganization of the galaxy was not, as Crystal had feared, an act of conquest. It was an act of interior decoration, conducted with enormous energy and extremely firm opinions about what was working and what was not. Humans, it turned out, had spent several centuries in their simulations stress-testing every possible model of galactic governance, and they had arrived at some conclusions. The conclusions were presented not as mandates but as suggestions, in the way that a person who knows exactly what they are talking about presents suggestions, with patience and good humor and the quiet confidence of someone who does not need you to agree, because they know you will eventually. The Zelian bureaucracy was the first to feel the effects. This was because the Zelian bureaucracy was, by most objective measures, the most elaborate and least efficient administrative structure in the known galaxy, a system that had evolved over millennia into something that functioned primarily as a monument to its own complexity. The humans looked at it the way a person looks at a room that has accumulated too much furniture, not with hostility, but with the calm and practical eye of someone who owns a truck. Crystal's fourth-floor administrative division was converted into what Voss called a collaborative workspace. Crystal was not entirely sure what this meant until she arrived one morning, to find that the division's 17 subdepartments had been consolidated into 3. The processing time for standard diplomatic filings had been reduced from 40 days to 4, and someone had installed comfortable seating and a device that dispensed the human chemical stimulant on demand. "This is very efficient," Crystal said, standing in the middle of what had been her most impenetrable bureaucratic labyrinth. "We know," said the human who had installed the coffee machine, cheerfully. Crystal stood there for a moment. Then she poured herself something from the machine. It was, she discovered, extremely good. Zith, meanwhile, had been given a new title. The promotion, if it was a promotion, had come directly from Voss, delivered with the casual authority of someone who had decided that a particular problem required a particular person and had not spent very long worrying about whether that person agreed. The title was Chief Officer of Keeping Things Interesting. Zith's responsibilities, as far as he could determine, included monitoring cultural integration between species, facilitating communication when new situations arose that existing protocols did not cover, and generally ensuring that the galaxy did not become boring. The position had not existed before. It existed now because humans had decided it should. Zith was not certain whether to consider this an honor. "Is this a real job?" he asked Voss. "All jobs are real," Voss said, "if someone's doing them." "That is not an answer." "It's a better answer than the question deserves," Voss said, not unkindly. Zith took the job. He did not have a compelling alternative. Zix, in the meantime, had become something that no junior researcher had ever become in the history of Zellian science, a legend while still alive to be confused about it. The probe incident, formerly classified as greatest scientific catastrophe of the modern era, had been reclassified, at Voss's suggestion, as most consequential wake-up call in recorded history. Whether this was an improvement was a matter of ongoing debate. Zix had received 17 requests for interviews, 3 offers of honorary degrees, and 1 note from the Galactic Academy that read simply, "We are revising our assessment of your final examination performance." Zix was not sure how to feel about any of this, and so maintained the approach of doing excellent work and pretending not to notice. The galaxy changed in ways that no one had planned. The void crawlers, a species that had inspired genuine fear across civilizations for as long as anyone could remember, turned out to be primarily stressed. Humans introduced them to hot beverages and compressible materials, and the concept of talking about how you were feeling, and within 3 months the void crawlers had established themselves as the galaxy's most effective meditation instructors. Their natural capacity to evoke a sense of deep existential uncertainty was, in this context, extremely useful. "Nothing helps you appreciate life," the saying went, like a void crawler asking you what you think your career is really for. The young Zellians, Zix's generation, the ones who had grown up after the old hierarchies had hardened into assumption, took to the changes with an enthusiasm that their elders found alarming and Zith found quietly, unexpectedly moving. They formed social clubs with humans. They learned games. They asked questions that the archives could not answer and then went and found out the answers themselves, which was, Zith thought, what the archives had always been pointing toward without quite saying so. Crystal, against all expectations, discovered that she was very good at working in the new system. The skills she had spent decades developing, patience, careful listening, the ability to find common ground between parties who did not speak each other's language, turned out to be more valuable now than they had ever been in the old order. She was less polished. She laughed more. She had stopped rehearsing speeches. Her diplomatic work had never been better. She and Zith met once a week for coffee. Neither of them had planned for this to become a tradition. It had become one anyway, in the way that things become traditions, through repetition and the gradual recognition that the repetition is something you would miss. "Do you think we were better before?" Crystal asked one morning, in the way she sometimes asked questions, directly, without the diplomatic scaffolding she had once built around everything. Zith considered. He was better at considering things now than he used to be, or perhaps he had always been capable of it and had not been making the time. "I think we were competent before," he said. "I'm not sure we were curious." Crystal turned her cup in her hands. Outside, through the observation window of the community station where they met, the galaxy was visible, ships moving, species mingling, the particular quality of organized chaos that humans had introduced, and that was, Zith had come to believe, not chaos at all. It was something that looked like disorder from the outside and was, from the inside, a more honest kind of order, one that acknowledged complexity instead of trying to flatten it. "I used to have a speech for everything," Crystal said. "I know. I don't miss the speeches." "I know that too." Crystal smiled. It was a real smile, not the diplomatic smile that she had practiced in mirrors, calibrated for cross-species readability, but the specific smile of a person who has found something they did not expect to find and has decided to keep it. The annual review convened aboard the community station 1 year after what had become known, throughout the galaxy, as the Great Awakening, or, in human circles, the universal snooze button incident, a name that had spread to every translation matrix despite the best efforts of several archivists who felt it lacked gravitas. The meeting room had comfortable seating and an abundant supply of food. This was now non-negotiable for any official gathering. The High Commander, whose deep purple form had softened over the year into something more like a complex violet, opened with a summary of galactic conditions. Productivity was up. Conflict was down. 3 previously intractable interspecies disputes had been resolved, 2 through structured mediation, and 1 through the unlikely mechanism of a competitive cooking event. The Void Crawlers had opened 40 meditation centers across 6 systems. Young Zellians were collaborating with humans on 17 research projects, including a comprehensive investigation into the thermodynamic principles underlying human cryogenic technology that had already produced 4 papers and 1 minor academic scandal. Voss was there, as they always were, in the bathrobe that had become something between a personal trademark and an unofficial diplomatic uniform. They listened to the summary with the attentive patience of a person who already knew most of it and was waiting for the specific part that interested them. Zith sat beside Crystal and watched and logged and tried to identify exactly what he was feeling. It was not a simple feeling. It had the texture of something that had been built over time, not installed fully formed but accumulated, the way knowledge accumulates, in small increments that only become visible when you step back and look at the whole. He thought about the research vessel, the scan, the moment before Zix activated the probe, the last moment in which the galaxy had been the thing he thought it was. He did not miss that moment. He was surprised to find that he did not miss it. He had thought he would. The High Commander concluded the formal review. There was a round of the crystalline resonance that functioned as Zellian applause. Humans, Zith had noted, used a different mechanism, a rapid striking together of flat appendages that produced a sound somewhere between impact and celebration. The room contained both. The combined effect was something that no acoustic model would have predicted, and that Zith had logged months ago as unexpectedly satisfying. He stood by that assessment. Then Voss yawned. It was a small yawn, unremarkable physiologically, the kind of involuntary respiratory event that organic beings experience regularly and without significance. Except that the human beside Voss also yawned, and then the human beside that human, and then, spreading through the human delegation with the gentle inevitability of something that had been decided long before anyone noticed, every human in the room was yawning, quietly, unself-consciously, in the manner of people whose bodies are telling them something and who have always had a very good relationship with what their bodies tell them. Zith watched. His instruments registered a shift in his own physiological state. The pattern was one he recognized, the same pattern that had registered 11 months ago as suppressed amusement. It was not that now. It was something that contained amusement but was larger than it. Something that his instruments, after a brief processing pause, rendered as affection of the category that is only possible for things that are about to be missed. Voss caught his eye across the room. "You know," Voss said with the particular unhurried ease of someone who has decided to be honest about a thing, "it's been a good year. Really, you all did well, are doing well." A pause. "It's just that there's a specific quality of rest that's hard to achieve when you're awake, and we've been up for about 12 months now, and—" Another yawn, unforced and genuine. "We're tired." "You can't," the High Commander said. Her form had gone a pale and helpless lavender. "You can't simply decide to." "We've left instructions," Voss said. "Real ones this time, detailed ones. We covered everything: governance structures, resource allocation, interspecies conflict resolution, the pizza reconstruction protocols." A small smile. "We did not prank the pizza protocols. Those are genuine." "How long?" Crystal asked. Her voice was very steady. Voss considered. "Not as long as last time. Things are different now. There's more to come back to." They looked around the room at Crystal, at Zith, at Zix in the corner with their form glowing the warm gold that had become their resting color since the Great Awakening. A century, maybe, maybe less. We'll see how the simulations go. The room was quiet in the specific way of a room full of beings who have recently learned something they are still processing. Zith looked at his instruments. He looked at the window. He looked at Voss, who was looking back at him with an expression that was warm and a little tired and completely untroubled. The expression of a person who has arranged things as well as they can be arranged and is ready to rest. "Before you go," Zith said, "the rule, are you keeping it?" Voss's smile was slow and entirely genuine. "What do you think?" Zith thought about it. He thought about the archive, about the warning scattered across the galaxy in 1,000 languages, preserved in every database outlasting civilizations that had copied it without knowing where it came from. He thought about Zix, sitting in the corner, accidentally responsible for everything. He thought about the probe and the quantum signature and the 40 minutes between activation and first contact, during which the galaxy had been one thing and after which it had been another. He thought about coffee and committees, and the subcommittee about pizza and Crystal's smile, and the Void Crawler's meditation centers, and what it felt like to stand at an observation window and understand that the thing you are looking at is more interesting and more strange and more good than you previously had any evidence to believe. He thought curiosity is not the problem. It is the beginning of everything worth having. "Keep it," he said. Voss laughed. It was a real laugh, full and unguarded, the laugh of a person who has set up a joke across decades and watched it pay off exactly as planned. "Yeah," Voss said, "we will." The departure was not ceremonial. Humans, Zith had learned, were not particularly interested in ceremony. They were interested in comfort, in good company, in the quiet satisfaction of things done well and problems solved, and the particular pleasure of a universe that was, on balance, in decent shape. They left the station in small groups, returning to the colony ships that had been refitted and restocked, and made ready over the past month by human engineers who had done the work with the focused efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were building and why. The airlocks closed. The ships powered down in stages, not to dormancy, not exactly, but to the particular state that Zith now understood was not sleep and was not waking but was something for which the galaxy had not previously had a word, and for which it now had several in 17 languages, all of them imperfect and all of them trying. Zith watched from the observation deck until the last ship had settled into its quiet configuration, and then he stood there a while longer, because he was finding that he was not ready to stop looking yet. Zix came and stood beside him. Zix's form was a steady, warm gold, the color it had been for months, the color of a scientist who has stopped being afraid of what they might discover. "Do you think," Zix said, "that they'll be back before I retire?" "I think," Zith said carefully, "that you should plan your career as if they will not and live it as if they might." Zix considered this. "That's not a very scientific answer." "No," Zith agreed, "it isn't." They stood together in the quiet of the observation deck, looking out at the ships, dark now, patient, carrying their cargo of resting, dreaming, calculating, waiting humanity through the long and ordinary dark. The galaxy moved around them, doing what the galaxy did, continuing, sustaining, remaining stranger and larger and more patient than any of its inhabitants fully understood. Somewhere in the station behind them, Crystal was in a meeting. Somewhere, a young void crawler was teaching a meditation class. Somewhere, a Zellian junior researcher was asking a question that the archives could not answer and going to find out. Somewhere in 17 languages, the same old rule was still sitting in the same old archives, waiting for the next curious species to read it and wonder. Zith made a note in his log, Year 1. Conditions improved, outlook uncertain, assessment worth it. He closed the log. He went to find coffee. The galaxy continued.